Great. So the purpose of this session is to show you how to work with the plugin editor and how to take a JavaScript library or some sort of code that you're trying to run and how best to kind of fit that in or have it play nice with bubble.io, right? Before we get started, a little bit about me. So I've been doing this since 2019. On Bubble before that, I did a lot of rapid application development tools. That's what they used to be called before the no-code phrase kind of came into existence. And I've been doing this ever since, never looked back, love doing what I do, and helped a lot of companies out there not only develop plugins, but also develop applications from all over. I thought just one or two slides to kind of just to show everyone what is it that we're going to be covering, and then we'll hop into a live development session. So what is a plugin? Well, basically a plugin, and this is taken directly from the Bubble manual, is a plugin is something that extends Bubble's functionality, that does something, that makes it do something that it doesn't natively do. Currently, we're sitting around 5,500 plugins, but those are growing almost every day. I developed, in my lifetime, approximately maybe around 90 or 94 plugins to date. Some of them are on the community, some of them are available under commercial license, and a lot of private plugins for private customers. Let's get a sense of what is it that we're going to be covering today. So we're going to go through the plugin editor, make sure that everyone is aligned, everyone understands what is it that we are trying to cover in this webinar. We'll cover the shared tab, the API calls, the elements, the actions, and some of the settings. We will do this first, and then we will try to do 2 or 3 different plugin builds. I hope we have time to cover as much. But just examples of how to bring in an external library, how to work with it, and how do you expose properties, and have it do whatever it is that you need to do. By the way, if you see me looking to this side, I'm looking at the screen that I'm presenting to you. This is where most of the work is. My camera is positioned here. I should have moved it to there, but didn't get the chance. All right, so without further ado, let's hop into the plugin editor. No, jQuery isn't depreciated. I think there's a new version of it that's been released as well. But Bubble does use jQuery. I'm just reading a question off the chat here. Bubble does use jQuery in the background, and it's helpful sometimes to leverage jQuery when you need it. So let's just run through the different tabs available to you in the plugin editor. The general tab here is where you define the plugin's name, its icon, what is it supposed to do, which category does it fit in. The share tab is where you basically leverage code, files, assets, or keys throughout the entire plugin, not just in a single place. API calls, this will look very familiar. This looks almost exactly the same as the API connector, and it does actually work almost the same way. One thing that people maybe didn't realize is you can actually copy your APIs from the plugin, from the API plugin, and just paste them in here right away, and you can wrap that as a plugin as well. It is also helpful, and I hope we have enough time to cover this, but you can create your own kind of custom objects and tap into those objects from the elements or the actions panel. And what I mean by here is when you're returning data in a plugin, you can return it as text, or you can return it as a number, and so on and so on. But if you really want to have a customized object where you have a nested JSON, then you can do that here as well. And I'll show you an example in a few minutes of how this works. And hopefully we'll have time to cover it in this webinar. The elements panel or tab, I think this is the most complicated part of the entire plugin development. There's a lot of nuance to it. And we'll be working with this mostly in this webinar. The Actions tab. Here in the Actions tab, you can create two different kinds of actions. You can create a client-side action, or you can create a server-side action. The server-side action returns data, so whatever your JavaScript does, you can return some sort of output, and you can see this here in the return values. But in a client-side action, you can't return any output. The client side is kind of helpful if you're, let's say, you're running a toast notification. So that is an action that you run on the client side. You're not expecting a return to that action. But a server-side action is maybe you're running a set of complex calculations that you have written in JavaScript, and you'd like to get some kind of output back from it. Lastly, what we'll be covering is the settings. And settings here, it just gives you the ability to work with your plugin, synchronize it with GitHub, publish it under a certain license. And if you don't know what these licenses mean, then please refer to the manual. But on the surface, private is just for you. Open source is for everyone for free. Commercial is somehow you want to monetize this plugin. And it is also important to say here, if your plugin is private, then you have to authorize the applications that you want to use it using the applications ID. If you do post something as commercial, but you still want one of your apps to use it, then you could still authorize one of your personal apps to use it or any other app, and they won't have to pay or shell out that price or that payment for it. You can also invite other people to the editor. This is really helpful, although it is quite restrictive. So other people can have access to the plugin editor. They can make modifications to your code. They can run tests against that code, but they can't really publish it. And at the current point of time, only one person at a time can actually be making edits to the plugin. And I hope that changes in the future. All right, great. Let's take a look at some examples of where shared API calls and elements come into play. So here's a plugin that's published on the store. It's called CSS Classes and Data Attributes. This was published after the very famous plugin, Classify, I believe it's called. And to me, I wanted the ability to attach data attributes to HTML elements in the DOM. And back then, the Classify element didn't have it. And so I put this plugin together itself. This plugin doesn't use any API calls, and it doesn't use any elements. All of the code is in the shared header. So why is this important? Well, first of all, since we are going to be picking up ID attributes from an element on the page and basically adding classes to it, then we need this code to run as soon as the app is available in Bubble, and we need it to run across all of the pages that Bubble has. And this is where the shared functionality is so important, because what the shared functionality allows you to do is it allows you to run this code or make this code available throughout the entire plugin, throughout not only the entire plugin, but throughout the entire application that runs this plugin. And this is where a shared header is really important. So in this particular code set, what we're doing is we have a couple of functions that process commands and a couple of functions that process elements. And then we have a mutation observer that's running on the page that watches the elements ID attributes, and if they contain a specific syntax, and that specific syntax is similar to Classify, where you put in something like add class and the class's name, and it will read that from the ID attribute in the DOM and convert that to CSS classes. So this is as simple as a plugin can get. Just one code that runs across every page. Another example is something like close this so I don't get confused. It's something more complicated, but let's just focus on this for now. This is an action And an action here is not associated with an element. An element can have its own set of actions as well. For example, if we go back to the toast notification example, let's say that you do have some actions that show toasts, right? And you need some kind of interactivity with that toast message. So you want to say in that toast message, you know, something like, are you sure you want to do this? And if somebody clicks yes, then you can run that action against a specific element. Each element has the specific actions, but here when I'm referring to actions, I'm referring as a one-off, a standalone action that's not related to any element. In this case, Google Maps Extended here has this action where distance is calculated. And as you can see here, it takes in a from latitude and longitude, and it takes in to latitude and longitude, and the type of units that you want to output. And it runs a server-side action where the distance is calculated based on the circumference of Earth or the planet, and it returns a value. So here's a function that does this calculation, and this is what the code runs in the action. So it goes out, it gets the from latitude and from longitude, and the to latitude and longitude and the units, then calls the function and returns the value. So this is another simple example of how you can utilize this action to perform some sort of complex calculation that you could definitely do in Bubble with workflows, but it's more cost efficient and faster to do it in code than to juggle a lot of actions across multiple workflows. By the way, if you guys have any questions, toss them directly in the chat window. I'll be happy to answer them. Another cousin of this specific action is here. In this specific action, what we're doing is we are picking up the from latitude and longitude from a database directly from the table, and we're iterating through this. So this is where we define these properties, and we will interact with these properties in a few minutes as we're building a plugin together. But basically what we're doing is we're asking the user here to define the table that they want to pull a list of locations from, and the from is static, and the to location is dynamic, is coming from the database, and the code is iterating through the data, and it's calculating it, sorting it, and returning it. And it looks very familiar or similar to the previous action, but the differences here are with around picking up the data with this e.get. And we'll explore e.get in a few minutes. All right, so let's close this and let's head over to our test plugin here. And before we hop into the code, we got to decide what we're going to build. So I have a few examples here. I think the first example we will start with is this library. So let's get familiar with it before we try or attempt to integrate it. And by the way, I don't have any of this previously prepared. I don't have any of the code previously prepared. So we'll do the development live. I know it's a bit risky for me, but it is what it is. It's a lot more fun when you do it live than have everything scripted. So Winbox is a JavaScript library that allows you to show a window inside the browser. And this is not a module window. This is not a pop-up. I don't know what the library uses in the background to kind of leverage this technology. I know there are new HTML APIs and CSS that's available when it comes to popovers and modules, but this library is older than those new APIs. But what this allows us to do is just to create this floating window. We can maximize it. We can minimize it. We can open it again. And I think the challenge here for this build is how do we actually put in bubble elements in this window? But we'll get to that. First, we need to kind of get it up and running in Bubble. So exploring the docs, you can see that they have two versions of the library. They have a bundled version, which comes with the CSS, the icons bundled in, and they have a non-bundled version. The constructor is very simple. It's Winbox, the title, the options as a key value pair. And the basic syntax is as follows. New window, and you give it a title, and it creates a window. All right. So let's work through this step by step, and we'll get familiar with the bubble editor as we're doing it. The first thing I'm going to do is I need to get my hands on these files, the JavaScript files and the CSS file. So I'm going to go to GitHub, and under here, I can see here's the non-bundled version. I'm going to download these two. Actually, I already downloaded them. They're in my download folder, so I don't need to do it again. Oh, oops, close that. Oh, there we go. And we're going to head back to the demo site because we're going to be following the instructions here. So back in the editor, I'm going to create a new element, and I'm going to call this element Winbox. From here, you're presented with the options of what category is this and the icon. It is a visual element, so I'm going to keep it as such. This Winbox won't be rendering anything per se, so I don't need it to be resizable. I don't need it to be responsive. I don't need any of this. But I am going to make it, I'm going to tick it on so you can see it in the window. So you can see it in the editor, and it'll be easier to select. Since this element itself is not going to be producing any visual, like this bubble element that we're naming Winbox is not going to be actually displaying any visuals. It's only going to be, it's only going to allow us to interact with the actual API of Winbox. We're just going to keep the size to, let's say, 50 by 50. We're going to keep the fields empty and the exposed states and the events, and we'll come back to those as we're building. Now, we covered the shared, and if you remembered in the shared, we have this HTML header. And the actions, we have actions, which are client-side and server-side. The elements are similar. So here you have this element code, and this will be added to the header of Bubble. And what does the plugin need us to do? It needs us to add these two lines. So I'm going to paste those in here. I need to provide the actual link to those files. So I need to head back to shared, and I need to upload those files. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this JS, upload it to Bubble, and then the CSS, and upload it to Bubble. I'm going to make a copy of this URL and this, and I'm going to head back to my elements, and I'm going to replace these. So here is the style sheet, so that's the CSS, and here's the JS, or the JavaScript, and that's the JS. All right, I like to stop here and make sure that those files loaded correctly. So I'm gonna already put in an ID where I'm gonna be testing this plugin against which application, and I'm gonna click Go to Test App. The first thing you'll notice in the URL, you can see that Bubble has added this test plugin here. And under the Plugins tab, you can see it listed here. I'm going to preview this page and just make sure that those files that I added to the header of the plugin are actually linked in properly. So I have a question about a CDN. Yes, a CDN will be much better, will be much faster. But in the docs here, they didn't specify a CDN. So I don't know where is it hosted. And yeah, I just opted to use Bubble shared file system. All right, so under Inspect in the browser, I can start to look for these files. And if you recall, these files are named Winbox min.css. And so what I can do is I can just do a quick search for it and see if it's here or not. Oh, it's not there because I didn't drag in the elements. Apologies. So now that I did put the element on the page, I should be able to see that header being added. Okay, and there we go. And if I follow this link, I should go to this file. Perfect. So now I made sure that my CSS and JavaScript has come in. I can move on to the next step. The next step is basically to run an action to show the window. And the action is posted as a constructor for this class. So we need to create, we need to construct a new object. Under actions, I'm going to create an action, and I'm going to call this action new window or open window. Let's call it new window. Once I created this action, I have access to the underlying code here in the code actions. So here's my new window. And what I can do is I can just paste in that code, and that should work. You notice that I'm not using like Visual Studio Code. I will get to that later on. I usually do, because I don't think this experience is the best in development. All right, let's keep going. So now that I added this action, I need a way to call on this action. So I'm going to add a button to the page, and I'm just going to call this open window. And this button will access this new window action that we just created. Refresh. I'm going to leave this open here on the side. I click open window. Here's the window. All right, let's keep going with our example. We're going to skip over this custom route. What this basically does is allows you to create a window inside a group, to restrict it within a group and not the entire window. It doesn't do much for this video, so we're just going to skip over this. All right, before we dive into the border, let's talk about this title. So here, they're taking you step by step to kind of understand what the syntax is and how to work with this win box. If we head all the way to the bottom, you can see that these are all the options that are available to you when you work with this library. So let's focus on the title for now, so we can get our hands dirty with the properties and dynamic values and so on. So back into the plugin, I already have an action that creates a window. I want to pass in a window title. So I'm going to create a field under this action called title. And once you create this property, it's called a property, you can tap into the value of this property using code. But before we do that, we got to decide what kind of property it is. Is it a static text, a number, a checkbox, a color, a dropdown, and so on? I'm going to go with dynamic value, and I'm going to set this as text. Obviously, this text here, this dynamic value, is not a requirement for us to render this window, right? Yes, obviously, it's a preference to have a title, but it's not a requirement. So I'm going to set this as optional. And I'm going to include some documentation to say the title of the window. Before we hop onto the code and see how we can interact with this property, let's click this button and go to the editor again and see what that did to our action. So our action now has a property called title. And if I give it some value right now, it doesn't do much, because we don't know, or we didn't pass the value of this property to this option in the Winbox. But how do you work with these properties? So if I head back to the action here and I click Show Documentation, you can see that this property is added here. I know it doesn't say much. It does some in another place, and it tells you how to work with properties much better when you actually expand over this update function. And we'll talk about the update function as we move along. But basically, properties is an object with all the values and the fields defined above. Right now, we didn't define anything above for update, so you can't see it, but the definitions go here under fields. So you can have a set of fields for the actual element that's on the page, which is this one, that you can display here, similar to what we're doing with this action here. Let's concentrate on the action for now. So if I want to pass in a title here, the simplest way to do it is to basically tap into properties and say .title. That will pick up the properties from the title field. And by the way, this title field is the name title, not the caption title, because they're two different things. The caption is what the user sees in the interface, and the name is what is it actually called, or what is that key called in the object. So let's give this a quick try. So if I refresh, and by the way, you notice that I didn't click this button again. You only need to click this button if you make fundamental changes to the structure of the plugin. But if you're just updating the code, then Bubble picks it up automatically and brings in the new code automatically. Let's go open window, and you can see here's some value. And if I change this some value to some dynamic value, then that should work as expected as well. Here's our dynamic value. Right, great. Now we know how to pass in these dynamic values. What else can we do? So we got the title. We can definitely do the border and the header, but I want to move a little bit faster. And I want to try to actually start working with mounting a part of the DOM. Yeah. You know what? Let's do this HTML so we could just display some content in there, and then we'll move in that direction. So let's do this again. So this is the title. Now let's decide on the body. Oh, sorry. So this is going to be the body of the window. And again, this is a dynamic value, and it's text. So here it's called HTML, but here we're calling it body. And I think body makes more sense to the user than just to say HTML. But how do we pass this? So right now we passed properties.title here directly into the Winbox constructor. But if we wanted to pass it, if we want to pass the HTML, then we got to convert this into an object. And this is one valuable lesson that you will learn when working with Bubble, is that if you're working with properties, it's best to always pick up the properties as early as possible in the code. So I'm going to create a new object here. I'm going to call this let options equal to an object. And in this object, I'm going to specify the title. And the title is going to be properties.title. And in the body, I'm going to say here HTML. I'm going to go properties.body. So picking up the properties as early as possible is most of the time important. It actually saves you a lot of headache in the long run. And the reason being is the way that Bubble executes this logic, right? So especially when we're talking about the update function, but it kind of happens everywhere, where Bubble will try to pick up these properties, especially if they're attached to tables and a database query needs to happen, like you need to get records. So Bubble will go through this. It will figure out that yes, you're picking up some dynamic value. It'll try to fulfill this request. If it can't fulfill the request, then what it'll do is it will terminate execution of the code and it will restart execution of the code to try to pick up those properties or those dynamic values first before it continues on. So having declared these properties as early as possible in the code is really important, especially if you're working with complicated plugins like that Google Maps extended. Yeah, it makes a lot of difference. So back to our example here. So what we can do is we can just pass in that option now directly to Winbox. And since we added this new body, we're going to make this as optional as well. And we're going to paste in this as the default value, just because we want to. All right, great. So if I go to Desktop, and I can just hit preview again. Here's our body. And here it is. That's the body that we wanted to pass. Okay. There's an interesting syntax here. This is the mount the DOM, where they basically have an element on the page with an ID, and they clone it, right, inside the actual Winbox. And there's another one here which has this auto mount. They both do kind of the same thing. One clones something. The other one, I believe what it does is it actually mounts it inside the Winbox. But let's just give this a try. So how would we do this? Well, we need to give a way for the user to decide whether they want to inject HTML or not into the body, or they want to pick up something from the Bubble app that's on the page and move it into the new window. So let's give this a quick try. I'm going to add a group here to the page, and let's get organized here for a bit. So let's go with column, and we're going to restrict the width for this to 386. And we're going to center this. Maybe add a flat color just to kind of distinguish this, and maybe some border that's red. And what we're going to do is we're going to put an element in here, which is this hello world. Center this and center this. Maybe give it a little bit more height. So let's say 264. There we go. So let's try to move this element inside this window. I'm going to give it an ID, and that ID will be group-1. So what does the syntax say? It says you need to pass in a key called mount where you specify the element ID. So one way we can interact with this is we can ask the user which type of body they want to work with. So we can introduce a new property called body type. And this body type can be a dropdown. And here we can tell them whether they want to work with HTML or maybe clone. And by default, we'll do HTML. And we'll move this up. And since this is the HTML part, I'm just going to change the caption. Notice that I didn't change the name, just the caption. And we're going to create a brand new field in here called clone. And this will be a dynamic value of text as well. And here in the documentation, All right. So back in our action, what we're going to do is we are going to modify this code a little bit. We're going to say if properties dot type, is it called type? Body type. What we can do is option dot HTML is equal to properties dot body. And we can do another if. I know this is not the most elegant code in the world, but I'm trying to do an example. Oh, don't do that. We're going to get rid of this. And hopefully that works. So we're going to go to our test app. I know I didn't change the workflows yet. I will right now. So here, the body type, we're going to move it to clone. And here we're going to say group -1. See what happens. We have an error. Let's go here. So it cannot read something in e.mount. My apologies. All right, that should do it. Am I boring you guys? Should I move a little bit faster? Is this pace good? And here it is. So in this particular example, the things that we covered are as follows. Great, thank you guys. So in this particular example, what we covered is as follows. We identified that loading scripts for an element in this header applies only when you add the element to the page. And so having this element on the page will also bring in the scripts that we need to work with the library. We also made use of properties for a specific action. And we got a live example up and running on how to interact with this. Now, obviously, Winbox has a lot of other APIs that are very interesting. And it would take me a while to kind of put all of it in this example for you guys. But I think what we should do is we should move on to another example so you can be more familiar with it. But yeah, it's a very interesting library. I think it has a lot of potential because what I believe you could do with it is you can actually trigger actions directly from here. So if I create a brand new action here, this should be clickable. So if I do something like, let's do something like navigate, go to page, or let's say refresh page. Let's see if we can actually trigger a bubble event directly from that cloned object. Sure, I'll come back to that. This refresh works here, but I'm just wondering, does it actually work if I'm cloning the DOM as well? If it doesn't, then we have another option, which is to actually use the singleton. But yeah, I would rather, not rather, but I just want to see if it works. No, it doesn't work. So, okay, interesting problem to be solved in debug. I'm sure I can get it to work somehow or the other, but again, not today. All right, we have a question here about uploading files. So the libraries that we are importing here are actually uploaded here in the shared section under the shared assets and resources. So after we have uploaded them, we get a unique ID or a unique URL, sorry. And depending on whether they are a style sheet or JavaScript, we are just referencing them here. All right, great. So what is the next example that we want to do? How about we work with this library? So this library is a toast library. And I think what we can do is we can make this toast library work across the entire application without actually having to create any elements whatsoever. So let's read a little bit about how it's done. So they have an installation procedure here for Node, but we're not using Node. They do include some CDNs, JS delivers here, and we can use JS deliver to do this. And so for you guys that don't know, I believe the correct term for this kind of script is a UMD script. Most people just say a script file, but that can really mean anything. This is called a UMD script. So let's head over to JS deliver. Oh, they don't have it here. Okay, we'll just make copies of these links. So let's get started. So I'm going to leave Winbox here, but I'm going to remove it from the page. And I'm just going to keep this, and I'm just going to rename it to show toast. Okay. Now for toast to work across the entire application, what we need to do is we need to import these libraries and the style sheet directly in a shared header for the editor. Why? Well, then why is because if they're included here in the element, then they only apply if the element is on the page. But if I include them in the shared here, then they'll be applied across all the pages in the bubble application. So let's do that. So we're going to make a copy of this. And I'm going to make a copy of this. Now, notice here, they want you to add this script after the body has been loaded, right? But the way the bubble works is a little bit different. This body is actually, so whenever you're looking at a bubble application and you go into the DOM, the body here is the body of the DOM of the HTML page, but what bubble actually does is it creates a new body or a new page element here. I'm confident that this will work the way it is, but if it doesn't, then what you'll need to do is we'll need to create a script to watch when the document has loaded and then basically inject this script or load this script at the end. It's a good question. I've never seen the plugin builder for it, but I would imagine it's going to be different. All right, so we have these scripts. Let's make sure that they are loaded inside the application. Let's click to go to the test app again. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to actually refresh this page, and we'll do a quick search, make sure that this JS is actually loaded and that we can interact with it. So we're going to do a Control F, and there's a script. Great, so it is loaded. Now let's take a look at how they want us to work with this. So this is a basic structure. since the script is already loaded into the DOM, that means it's already available for me. I can use the console window to start testing and development right away. I don't have to stick to the plugin editor. Like, you can do some rough proof of concepts directly in here. So I'm going to initialize this variable. Just make sure that this variable is initialized now. Yes, I do have access to it. It's right here. And the syntax is something like this. And if I run this, then there's my toast. So great. Now we know that we have access to this. We know how to run it. How do we build it in the plugin? We're already done the importing. So let's head over to actions. And let's create a brand new action. And let's call this toast. And this is going to be a server, a client-side action, because we're not expecting a response back, right? So remember, client-side action purely runs in a browser. You know, it mostly used for things like toast or modifying the DOM or bringing some visuals into play, right? We're not expecting a response back. And what I mean by response is something like this. So if you're running, let's say, this action, and you want to do like create a new thing, and you want to navigate and go to something, and so the result of this is the response that I'm talking about. So a client-side action doesn't have this result of a step, so you can't go back and pick up what you need from it. All right, let's keep going. So here, what do I need for this toast? Well, at minimum, I need a message, and I need a type. So they have error, they have success. What else do they have? So they have duration, they have ripple, they have position, they have types. And types is an option or an enumeration or an array that's available for us here. And these are the types. Where are they? Type. Oh, they don't even say it. I'm pretty sure it's in here someplace. We just have to look for it. But we barely have enough time, and we didn't cover as much as we wanted to cover. So let's just keep going with this. So I'm going to say here type. And for now, I'm just going to hard code this to a dropdown. And it's going to be one of two options, either the error or the success, because that's what I saw right now. So I'm going to go error. I don't know why Bubble sometimes does this, but whenever I'm typing, it just throws me out of the field. So I have to keep clicking to come back. Oh, come on. Oh, stop it. Okay. So by default, it's success. And here we're going to go with the message. And this will be a dynamic value of text. Yeah, that happens everywhere. All right, so how do we work with this? Well, exactly as the docs say. Oh, you can see here's this info, and you can do background colors. Again, these are all properties you bring in. So back here, just going to make a copy of this and take it here. And again, I'm going to keep this simple. Obviously, there's better ways to write the code. But what we can do is we can say properties.type is equal to success. Then what you should do is we'll do the success. And obviously we can just modify this. Make a copy of that. Yeah. And we need to change actually this to a error. So we got message, properties.message, we're tapping into that, success, we're tapping into that. So let's head over to the test app again. And I want to use the last 5 minutes to show you guys some other things that you need to know, and also maybe a resource that you'll find interesting. So Toast is available for us now here. We can define success. We can type in any value. And if we run this, we should get back that toast notification here at the bottom. There you go, there's the toast. And obviously, if you change it to error, then it becomes error. All right, things you need to know from this point onwards. I think the first thing you need to do whenever you're developing a plugin is to kind of think about the overall architecture of how is it going to be put together. Should it be an element? Should it be an action? Should it be loaded in the header? And if it is an element, then how do I structure its properties and its actions in a way that it becomes usable in Bubble? A lot of times when you're using plugins in the store, you'll see people flood this properties panel for a plugin with so many fields. Like this panel here will be flooded with so many fields, right? I don't think that's the right approach. I don't believe it is. I know people have become accustomed to it, but I don't think it is because it just creates confusion on how to use it. Because right now we don't have the capability to show and hide properties depending on some dynamic selection. So you gotta use some, brain power to kind of figure your way around. So having a clear structure is so important. Can't over stress that point. Second thing is you got to be aware of the syntax that Bubble ships with. And this is where the magic is. If you click show documentation on initialize, then you will get to see that syntax. So here under this function initialize, you can see you have access to instance and you have access to context. Instance is this object that gives you access to the canvas that allows you to write back expose states, custom states. It allows you to trigger events. It allows you to save data and pull up data. And this data is really important because this data is the only way you have to have persistent storage for that session readily available for you. And it also allows you to communicate or pass data along from functions like initialize to update to any other action. So if we head back here to the Google Maps Extended, just to kind of show you an idea of how this works. We have an element called Maps Extended. And in this initialize function, we are creating a map. We're adding it to the canvas using instance.canvas. But we are actually storing that div directly in data. So it can be accessed in later actions. So that object is already created, the map is already visible on the page. There's no point to destroy it and recreate it every time you need to interact with it or you need to do something dynamically with it, right? So that's extremely valuable. Another thing that's valuable is, although maybe not so much relevant now, is this async. If you need to have an async function, then it is best to use async syntax. And in the past, we didn't have real async support, and we had to always rely on this async function. I know most of this is depreciated now. We do have access to that, but it is still helpful to know how it works. Also, this get function. So whenever you're interacting with dynamic data, so let's say you want the user to pick up a field or a row from a database, the first thing you need to do is you need to tell the user the data source, for example. And what they'll do here is they'll create something like a oh, this is exposed states. My apologies. Here, data source. And you will say app type. And then later on, if you wanted to specify the actual list of the data, then you could say something like list. And that will, then you can say, for example, this is a dynamic value of the type data source that we specified up here. And this will all make sense in a second. And then later, if you want field, then you can say, for example, a field is called first name. You want the user to point. If we're imagining this as a contact table, you want the users to point to the first name, then you will say fields of the data source. And here you're trying to pick up text. So just to kind of show you what this looks like. As a data source. So here you can specify the user. And here you want to do a search for all the users. And here we want, I didn't specify this as list. You can specify it from here. And then you can point to that first name field, right? And so that e.get will allow you to get that data. And notice as soon as I added those fields, if I go to the update function and I click show docs, you can see that it is a list. And it tells you that this list, you can get the length of the list and you can get a specific value in the list. All right, I know we're at time, so I want to leave you with one final resource here. I love using VS Code to build these plugins. And so what I have is a boilerplate that I always use and I always go back to. And in that boilerplate, or alongside that boilerplate, what I have is a repo with snippets here that will allow you to do autocomplete on the code. So this way, if you're not really familiar with the way that this code is written, you can just type in Visual Studio Code bubble and it will pull up all the snippets for you. And it will actually put the cursor right on the field that you need to specify. So this is available for you here. If you search online how to edit VS Code snippets, you can do it yourself, but it's fairly easy to do. If you are in VS Code, this will look something like this. So if I come to the bottom here and I type bubble, you can see that if I want to get a context key, I can get the key and I can specify the name and it auto completes it for me. And the way you would add those snippets is you will make a copy of this file here by clicking this copy raw file. And in VS Code, you'll hit Control-Shift-P and say configure snippets, and then type JavaScript, and you can paste that in there, and that will be available for you. I hope this was informative. Obviously, there's a lot to cover, and I know the 1 hour is not enough, but feel free to reach out to me, guys, if you have any questions. You have my details. And yeah, have a great day. See you guys all soon.